Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The air was thick, sticky with tension, as Alethea Draven walked into the dimly lit alley behind the docks. Her crisp Navy SEAL uniform, sharp and authoritative, gleamed faintly under the flickering neon sign above a closed warehouse. She had been trailing the smuggling operation for weeks, but nothing had prepared her for this. 5 men stepping out of the shadows with knives in hand, smirks twisting their faces. Before she could react, one lunged forward, and the metallic edge of a blade sliced across her chest. The fabric of her uniform tore with a sharp rip, exposing a streak of bruised skin. A heartbeat later, another knife grazed her shoulder. Every instinct screamed danger, but Alethea didn't flinch. Not even a whisper escaped her. Pain spiked, hot and immediate, but she masked it with cold precision. Her eyes scanned the alley, a tangle of crates, loose chains, puddles reflecting neon blue light. Her mind raced faster than her heartbeat. She noted the men's positions, the rhythm of their breathing, the nervous twitch in the youngest one's fingers. The world slowed. She remembered the hours of training, the countless drills where seconds meant life or death. And yet, something deeper surged, a surge of righteous anger. They thought this was intimidation. They thought this was humiliation. They had no idea who they were dealing with. One of the attackers laughed, loud and cruel, tugging at the ripped fabric of her uniform. "Looks like someone's soft under that shiny suit," he sneered. The others joined in, circling her, knives glinting like predatory eyes. Alethea's lips tightened into a thin line. Every muscle coiled like a spring. She had been underestimated before, on missions, in briefings, even by those who served beside her, but never again. Not tonight. Not here. Her mind flashed to her squad back at the base, to the silent camaraderie of shared hardships, and the oath she had taken to protect and to fight. She wasn't just a target, she was a force. And the moment her patience snapped, the alley would become a classroom in precision and discipline, taught by someone they'd made a grave mistake challenging. A sudden movement, one man advanced with reckless speed, knife raised, and in that heartbeat, Alethea's world narrowed. She saw the angles, the weight distribution, the overextension of his step. Instinct and training collided, her body acted before thought. She sidestepped with fluid grace, grabbing the attacker's wrist and twisting. The knife clattered across the wet cobblestones. Panic flashed in his eyes, mirrored across the circle of men. Time slowed further. They were suddenly aware that this wasn't a woman to intimidate. This was a SEAL. A warrior. And the lesson had just begun. A shadow fell behind Alethea, a faint metallic glint catching the dim light. Her hand shot out, seizing a dropped blade and flipping it expertly, pressure on the wrist, lever against the elbow. She moved with the kind of fluid, terrifying precision that only comes from years of life-or-death training. One by one, the men faltered, stumbling over their own aggression. Her uniform, torn but resolute, became a symbol, not of weakness but of defiance. A sharp exhale, a moment of stillness, and the alley went quiet. The attacker stared at her, eyes wide, bodies trembling, knives useless in their slack hands. Alethea's chest rose and fell steadily, adrenaline still pulsing, yet her expression remained icy, unwavering. Then she spoke, her voice low but lethal, "Wrong person to mess with." And in that instant, every man knew they had made the gravest mistake of their lives. The city was quieter before the alley. Alethea had grown up in the coastal port town of Verento, a place where the scent of saltwater mingled with diesel and rust. The docks had been her playground, a maze of crates, ropes and shadows where she learned to move silently, to watch and wait, and to trust her instincts above all else. Back then, she had been small, wiry, and underestimated by every boy who dared to challenge her. They had laughed when she climbed cargo cranes faster than anyone, laughed when she disappeared into fog-shrouded warehouses, always returning with tales of secrets no one else could uncover. That same instinct, an unbroken thread of observation, patience and calculation, had led her here tonight. Years later, the Navy SEAL program had demanded everything. Alethea remembered the mornings before sunrise, when her muscles screamed with exhaustion and the trainers demanded more runs, more push-ups, more precision. Pain was constant. Humiliation was frequent. Yet she thrived in it. Each tear, each bruise, each mocking comment from instructors built her into something they couldn't see at first glance, a force of unyielding will. She wasn't just a soldier, She was an observer, a strategist, a fighter who could anticipate threats before they happened. The smuggling operation she was now investigating had started months ago. Intelligence reports hinted at weapons moving through Varento's docks, small shipments that somehow avoided every inspection. Alethea had volunteered for the assignment, drawn by curiosity and duty. Her team had scoured shipping manifests, interrogated low-level informants, and tracked the subtle patterns of movement that others overlooked. She had noticed the tiny shifts, the extra crate, the unusual seal, the way workers avoided certain containers. It all added up. And then came the tip about tonight, a warehouse on the edge of the port district. Alethea remembered the moment she arrived, blending seamlessly with shadows. Her uniform gleamed in the dim glow of the neon signs, a calculated choice. She wanted them to see her but not recognize her as a threat at first glance. That balance of visibility and invisibility had saved lives before. She moved quietly, ears straining for the slightest clue, eyes catching the glint of metal, the whisper of fabric, the shuffle of hesitant footsteps. But she hadn't expected the ambush. Not tonight. Not after meticulous preparation. She had accounted for guards, cameras, patrols, but not the brazenness of men who underestimated a woman in uniform. And the sight of her ripped fabric, the feel of steel against her shoulder, had stirred something ancient inside her, a flash of anger mingled with cold calculation. She remembered her father's words as a child. People will test you. Always. They'll try to see how much you'll take. The trick is to stand unbroken and let them regret it. Her training, her instincts, and that childhood lesson collided in that alley. Each attacker revealed a weakness, a hesitation. She exploited them instinctively, fluidly, almost effortlessly. And yet, despite the victory of those first few moments, her mind was already racing forward. This wasn't just an attack, it was a message. Someone powerful wanted her distracted, humiliated, perhaps even injured. And Alethea knew better than anyone that mistakes in judgment in her line of work could cost lives, her own or those she swore to protect. As she crouched by a crate, surveying the trembling men at her feet, her thoughts turned to strategy. Tonight was only the beginning. The men she had disarmed were minor players. The real threat remained hidden, orchestrating from the shadows. She could feel it in the tension in the air, the way the neon light flickered over the cracked concrete. Something bigger was coming, something calculated, and she had to be ready. Her pulse slowed slightly, but her senses stayed sharp. Every sound, the drip of water from a rusted pipe, the distant rumble of a cargo truck, the faint scuff of shoes on metal, was a signal, a clue. And Alethea, Navy SEAL, observer, survivor, was prepared to follow everyone to its source. Because in Varento the rules were simple. Underestimate the wrong person and the consequences were inevitable. The warehouse smelled of oil and wet wood, an oppressive stench that stuck to the back of Alethea's throat. She slipped through the shadows, careful, deliberate, each step silent against the concrete floor. Her uniform was torn, but she wore it like armor, an unspoken warning to anyone foolish enough to challenge her again. The 5 men she had disarmed lay sprawled, groaning, their knives useless at their sides. Yet even as she moved forward, her instincts screamed that the real danger was elsewhere. A soft hiss echoed from the far corner. She froze, heart tightening. The shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and her eyes caught the glint of a device, a small, makeshift alarm rigged to one of the crates. Someone had been watching, anticipating her moves. Her chest tightened, not with fear but with recognition. This was no random ambush. Someone wanted her humiliated, controlled, distracted. And worse, someone within the operation, someone she trusted, had tipped them off. Alethea crouched, scanning the area with the precision of a predator. Her mind replayed every interaction from the past week. The informants she had debriefed, the dock workers who lingered too long with idle chatter, the fellow Navy personnel who had volunteered for surveillance shifts. One detail nagged at her, a small inconsistency she had dismissed until now. A shipment log that didn't match the cargo, a colleague's explanation that seemed rehearsed. Betrayal rarely came with fanfare. It whispered in the margins, in the spaces no one noticed. And tonight it whispered straight to her. Her communicator buzzed softly against her shoulder. She pressed it to her lips, keeping her voice low. "Status?" she asked, eyes never leaving the shadows. Static at first, then a faint whisper of a voice she trusted. Lieutenant Corvin, her teammate who had been on perimeter watch. "Alethea. Something's off. I think someone's inside. Be careful." The line went dead. Her pulse quickened, a tight rhythm against her ribs. She knew then that the operation had been compromised from the inside. Whoever had orchestrated this ambush had a larger plan, one that went far beyond a few stolen crates. And that meant every move she made from now on could be observed, anticipated, and countered. Alethea pressed herself against the cold metal of a shipping container, peeling back layers of thought. She needed to act, but she also needed patience. She could rush in and risk being overwhelmed. Or she could wait, watch, and turn their strategy against them. The SEAL training she had endured flashed in her mind. Situational awareness, patience under pressure, turning disadvantage into advantage. Footsteps. A shadow shifted. She spotted a figure approaching, casual but deliberate, a smirk barely visible under the brim of a dark cap. Recognition hit like a punch. One of the informants she had relied on, now moving with purpose, clearly signaling to the hidden players. Rage surged, hot and immediate, but she swallowed it. Her uniform was torn, but her discipline was intact. She couldn't afford mistakes. With the precision of a seasoned warrior, Alethea moved, silent and lethal, intercepting the informant before he could trigger the hidden alarm. A quick twist, a disarm, a sharp glance that conveyed both warning and authority. "Wrong person to mess with," she said again, her voice steady, deadly calm. But she knew this was only the beginning. Whoever was pulling the strings from the shadows had bigger plans, deeper networks, and sharper knives than these men. And now, with betrayal so close, Alethea understood something chilling. She couldn't trust anyone fully, not even those sworn to protect her. Her mind raced, calculating next moves, anticipating threats, preparing for the storm that was coming. The torn uniform, the wet alley, the hidden observers, all of it converged into a single truth. Survival would depend not on strength alone, but on cunning, patience, and the ability to strike before the enemy even realized they were vulnerable. And she would strike. The warehouse seemed larger than it was in the dim glow of the neon lights. Alethea's boots echoed softly on the cold concrete as she moved between towering crates. Every shadow felt alive, every distant shuffle a potential threat. The torn uniform clung to her like a second skin, proof of both past confrontation and imminent danger. Her chest rose and fell steadily, but beneath her disciplined calm, a storm of questions raged. Who had betrayed her? Why now? And how deep did this corruption run? Her eyes scanned the shipping manifest she had retrieved earlier, flicking through scribbled notes and discrepancies she had almost overlooked. Patterns emerged. A series of shipments labeled as construction materials had never actually arrived at the intended destinations. The trail led straight to high-ranking officials within the Port Authority, men and women who were supposed to enforce law and order. And the more she examined, the more it became painfully clear. Someone on the inside was orchestrating these ambushes, manipulating movements, and using her own instincts against her. Alethea's hand rested briefly on the hilt of her sidearm, feeling the cold reassurance of the metal. She had trained for this, but the thought that a trusted colleague could be involved gnawed at her. Her mind flashed back to the day Lieutenant Corvin had joined her team, a confident, precise operator, someone she had admired. But admiration didn't guarantee loyalty. Her gut, the one honed through years of observation and experience, whispered caution. The faint sound of scuffing metal drew her attention to a narrow corridor between containers. A figure emerged, moving with the casual rhythm of someone who believed they were unseen. Alethea's eyes narrowed. She followed silently, counting her breaths, calculating distance. The figure paused, then whispered into a communicator. Every word, every gesture was a breadcrumb leading to the true architects of the plan. She couldn't act yet. Not without certainty. Instead, she retreated into shadow, letting the figure move out of sight. Alethea's mind raced, piecing together motives, relationships, and hidden agendas. She thought of the warehouse owner, the smugglers who had been tipped off to her presence, and the informants she had relied on. Each played a part in a tangled web she was only beginning to unravel. One wrong step now, and the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for her but for the lives depending on her success. Her pulse steadied as she leaned against a stack of crates, allowing herself a brief moment of reflection. Fear was natural, yes, but fear could not control her. She remembered her father's voice from her childhood in Verento. Strength without clarity is wasted. Observe first. Strike second. Clarity. That was the weapon she needed, sharper than any knife, faster than any bullet. A sudden noise, a crate toppling over, snapped her attention back to the present. She moved like liquid, silent and precise, and saw two men struggling to lift a container that blocked their path. One of them glanced nervously around, clearly unaware that Alethea was already there, calculating every angle, every possible outcome. She stepped forward, her presence unseen until the last second, and disarmed them with efficiency that was almost theatrical. Neither man realized the peril until her gloved hand was at their throats, their weapons on the floor useless. "Wrong person to mess with," she murmured again, but this time the words carried a new weight. It was no longer just a warning. It was a declaration. Someone within her trusted circle had set this in motion, and she would uncover every thread. Betrayal, she realized, was more dangerous than any blade. It cut deeper, leaving scars invisible but lethal. Alethea's gaze lifted to the shadows above, the neon light flickering across the warehouse ceiling. Somewhere out there, the true orchestrators were watching, expecting her to panic, to make mistakes. But she would not. Not now. Not ever. Her jaw tightened. Tonight had been an ambush. Tomorrow she would take the fight to those who thought they could manipulate her. And when she did, they would learn the hard truth. Alethea Draven was not just a Navy SEAL. She was a storm waiting to strike. Alethea's boots barely made a sound as she slipped through the maze of containers, each shadow a potential threat. The warehouse was now a labyrinth of whispers, metal, and anticipation. Her uniform, still torn, felt heavier with each step, not from weight but from the responsibility she carried. The torn fabric reminded her that every misstep tonight could be fatal. She had survived the ambush, but the true test was only beginning. The signal from her communicator was faint, static-laced, but unmistakable. Someone, an insider, was tracking her every move. It wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. Her mind raced, analyzing possibilities, calculating angles, and predicting behavior. Every creak, every flutter of a shadow, told her that she was walking into a trap, one far more complex than the alley ambush. A faint laugh echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Alethea froze, her pulse tightening. The voice was unmistakable. A high-ranking officer from the Port Authority, someone who should have been an ally, someone who had the authority and means to orchestrate the ambush. Rage burned inside her, but she swallowed it. Fury was dangerous in moments like this. Precision was lethal. She needed to act without revealing herself too early. From her vantage point behind a stack of crates, she observed. The officer, flanked by armed men, appeared confident, almost smug. But Alethea saw the cracks. Hesitation in their glances, nervous energy betraying overconfidence, an assumption that she had been weakened by the earlier attack. A mistake. One that would cost them dearly. She moved like a shadow, silently circling the perimeter, creating distance and opportunity. She replayed her training, the hours of drills, the countless scenarios rehearsed until muscle memory was flawless. Every step, every breath was deliberate. The enemy thought they were controlling the game, but she had learned long ago that the battlefield favored the patient, the observant, and the unpredictable. Suddenly, a loose chain rattled behind her. One of the officer's men had spotted movement, too late. Alethea reacted instinctively, flipping her sidearm with practiced speed and precision. The weapon cleared the first attacker before he could raise his own. Shock froze the others for a heartbeat, just long enough for her to advance, closing the distance with lethal efficiency. Steel met flesh in a controlled, brutal dance. Alethea's moves were not reckless. They were precise, calculated, devastating. The men who had thought her uniform marked vulnerability found themselves disarmed and incapacitated before their brains could even process the threat. She moved with rhythm, a deadly flow, each strike and grab rehearsed but alive with instinct. The officer, realizing too late, tried to retreat, but Alethea anticipated every step. She cornered him against the cold metal wall, eyes hard, unyielding. The warehouse seemed to shrink around them, the echoes of metal, the faint hum of neon, the adrenaline-charged silence. "You thought you could manipulate me," she said, voice low and deadly. "Wrong person to mess with." The officer's smirk faltered, replaced by the stark realization of defeat. Alethea's presence was magnetic, suffocating. Every ounce of confidence he had dissipated in the weight of her gaze. He understood now that every plan, every manipulation, every betrayal had been seen, analyzed, and nullified before he had even finished executing it. She allowed herself a brief pause, letting the adrenaline settle just enough to observe the scene. Her enemies were disarmed, incapacitated, and terrified. But Alethea knew this was not the end. Someone higher up, someone more dangerous, had set this chain of events in motion. This victory, while decisive, was only the prelude. As she surveyed the warehouse, her mind mapped every potential threat, every escape route, every weak point in the enemy's network. Tonight she had survived. Tomorrow she would strike. And the lesson would be final: never, ever underestimate Alethea Draven. The warehouse was silent now, but the calm was deceptive. Alethea's senses remained razor-sharp, every shadow a potential threat, every flicker of light a clue. The men she had disarmed were groaning softly on the floor, dazed and defeated. Yet, Alethea knew this was only the beginning. Their blunders had been deliberate distractions, orchestrated by someone far more calculating. Her eyes scanned the crates and shipping containers, each one a puzzle piece. One crate had a hidden compartment she hadn't noticed before. She crouched, lifting the edge and revealing a stack of sealed envelopes, each labeled with cryptic codes and shipment dates. Her pulse quickened. These weren't just smuggling records, they were directives, instructions from someone high above, someone with both influence and audacity. Whoever was behind this had tentacles stretching into the very heart of the port, using allies and enemies alike as pawns. Alethea's hand grazed the edge of a metal crate, and her thoughts drifted briefly to betrayal. She had trusted people, shared intel, built plans with colleagues she considered part of her inner circle. And yet, the ambush, the tipped-off shipment, the manipulations, it all pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of her movements. Trust had been weaponized against her, and the sting was sharp. Anger and hurt surged, but she swallowed them, converting raw emotion into focus. A noise, a distant creak of a door, snapped her attention to the far end of the warehouse. Shadows moved with purpose. Alethea's body tensed, muscles coiling like springs. The footsteps weren't just random patrols, they were deliberate, calculated, and familiar. She recognized the rhythm, the pace, someone trained, someone skilled. Her mind raced. Could it be Corvin? No, he wouldn't have betrayed her. Or would he? The thought twisted in her chest like a knife, forcing her to consider every possibility, every contingency. She moved swiftly, silently positioning herself between the new arrivals and the exposed shipment logs. The first figure emerged, a tall man in a dark coat, face obscured under the brim of a hat. His movements were fluid, predatory. Alethea's training kicked in, analyzing posture, weight distribution, potential striking angles. She noted every detail, calculating her response. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, voice calm, almost conversational, yet layered with menace. He took another step, and two more figures appeared behind him, weapons glinting faintly under the neon light. Alethea's gaze hardened. They weren't just here to observe, they were here to eliminate. Her mind raced. She couldn't confront them blindly. Strategy, patience, and observation were her allies. She shifted silently, creating a triangle of angles, forcing the intruders into positions she could control. Each breath, each micro-movement was deliberate, a dance between predator and prey. Then came a fleeting thought, almost a whisper in her mind. There's a pattern here, a timing they follow. Wait for the overstep. And she waited. A flash of movement. The man lunged too early, one of the others following instinct rather than logic. Alethea acted in a heartbeat, disarming the first attacker with precise leverage, knocking him off balance. The second moved to intervene, only to meet a counter that left him sprawled and incapacitated. The third froze, recognizing the tide had turned. Alethea's uniform, torn and battle-streaked, seemed almost symbolic now, a testament to endurance, skill, and resolve. "Wrong person to mess with," she said quietly, almost to herself, as the warehouse fell into tense silence once more. Her chest heaved with controlled breaths, mind racing. She now understood the scale of the conspiracy. It wasn't just dock workers, low-level smugglers, or corrupt officers. It was someone higher, someone orchestrating events from behind a curtain of loyalty and deception. And the realization left her both frightened and resolute. Alethea knew what had to come next. She needed allies she could truly trust, intelligence she could verify, and a plan precise enough to outmaneuver an unseen puppet master. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. And she would be the one holding the first decisive hand. The night had grown colder, the salt-laden wind from Varento Harbor cutting through the narrow alleyways leading to the warehouse. Alethea crouched behind a stack of crates, breath steady, eyes sharp, every sense alert. Her uniform, still ripped and streaked with grime, clung to her as a badge of endurance. She wasn't just prepared, she was primed. Tonight, she would force the first confrontation, and make her enemies realize the cost of underestimating her. From her vantage point, she could see the movement inside the warehouse. Shadows flickered, the occasional glint of steel catching the neon light. Alethea's pulse raced with controlled intensity. The conspirators were cautious now, aware of her presence but confident in their numbers. They didn't yet know that she had spent the last few minutes analyzing patterns, memorizing every patrol route, every blind spot. Strategy was hers. A sudden shuffle drew her attention, a signal she had been waiting for. One of the intruders moved too quickly, breaking the rhythm she had mapped in her mind. Alethea's muscles coiled like springs. She slipped from shadow to shadow, closing distance without sound, until she was behind him. A swift movement, a precise grab, and the man went down silently, disarmed before he could call out. Her eyes scanned the remaining figures. Two more emerged, weapons raised, cautious but aggressive. Alethea calculated angles, distance, and momentum. One misstep, one hesitation, and she would exploit it. Her body moved on instinct, a deadly dance born of years of training, each strike fluid and decisive. The first man's knife clattered across the concrete as she twisted his wrist and used his momentum to send him sprawling. The second lunged, too late. Her sidearm met his hand, and within seconds he was incapacitated, eyes wide with disbelief. From across the warehouse, the orchestrator finally revealed himself, a tall figure in a dark coat, hat shadowing his face. His presence radiated control, menace, and cunning. Alethea froze for a heartbeat, evaluating. This was no ordinary opponent. He had orchestrated ambushes, betrayal, and deception with precision. But Alethea's resolve did not waver. She had trained for moments like this, prepared for the storm before it even arrived. The orchestrator spoke, voice calm yet threatening. "Impressive, Lieutenant Draven. But you're in over your head." He advanced, confident in his plan and his network of pawns. Alethea's eyes never left his. Every fiber of her being braced for the first real test of strategy, strength, and will. The first strike came from him, a feint testing her reaction. Alethea sidestepped, countering with a precise motion that disarmed him of his hidden knife. He stumbled slightly, revealing a flicker of doubt. She pressed forward, methodical, each movement calculated to exploit overconfidence. The dance continued, rapid and deadly, a blur of motion and steel. Her torn uniform, soaked with sweat and grime, bore witness to every calculated strike, every near miss, every small victory. And then, in a heartbeat of clarity, she saw the opening, a microfraction of a second when his balance shifted, arrogance overwhelming caution. She moved, disarming him completely, forcing him to his knees. Alethea's gaze locked on his, icy and unrelenting. "Wrong person to mess with," she said, voice low, deadly. Every syllable carried the weight of every ambush, every betrayal, every calculated risk she had endured to this moment. Alethea's presence dominated the warehouse. Her authority, her skill, her unwavering focus radiated like a weapon itself. For the first time, silence fell. The air hummed with tension, the night holding its breath. The first showdown was over, decisively in Alethea's favor. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. The orchestrator had more resources, more men, more schemes waiting. But she had sent a clear message. No one underestimated Alethea Draven and survived unscathed. The city outside Varento Harbor had gone silent, but Alethea could feel the pulse of danger vibrating through the streets. She moved with purpose, her torn uniform now a testament to both survival and relentless focus. Every step echoed against the wet asphalt as she traced the breadcrumbs left by the orchestrator, the insider whose betrayal had turned a routine mission into a deadly labyrinth. Her mind replayed every detail from the warehouse. The stolen shipments, the sabotaged alarms, the carefully coordinated ambushes. It was all too precise for a single operative. This was the work of a mastermind, someone calculating every variable, predicting her moves before she even made them. The realization sent a shiver through her spine, but fear had no place in her mind. Clarity, precision, and controlled aggression were her weapons now. Alethea reached the edge of a quiet industrial district, warehouses shuttered and abandoned, but one building stood out. Lights flickered faintly from a high window, too deliberate to be random. Her instincts screamed that she had found the core, the nerve center of the conspiracy. Every muscle coiled, every breath measured. She approached silently, hugging the shadows, every sense alert for traps, surveillance, or guards. Inside she spotted him, the true orchestrator. A man in a tailored dark coat, mid-40s, with cold, calculating eyes that reflected both intelligence and cruelty. Around him, a network of monitors displayed camera feeds from various docks and warehouses. Every shipment, every ambush, every surveillance point lay exposed before her. He hadn't just planned the attacks. He had controlled the flow of information, manipulated allies, and weaponized trust. Alethea's pulse quickened, but her movements remained precise. She circled the perimeter, noting exits, angles, and potential threats. This wasn't a simple confrontation. It was a tactical puzzle. One misstep, one audible breath, and the mastermind could vanish, take hostages, or trigger alarms that would flood the district with reinforcements. She needed patience, observation, and flawless execution. The mastermind turned suddenly as if sensing her presence. His gaze swept the room, landing on Alethea in the shadows. A slow smile spread across his face. "Lieutenant Draven," he said, voice smooth and controlled. "I've been expecting you." The tone carried neither surprise nor fear, only the arrogance of someone who believed they were untouchable. Alethea stepped forward, every movement deliberate, controlled, confident. "You underestimated me," she said, her voice low and deadly calm. "Big mistake." Her eyes never wavered. She assessed his reactions, micro-tremors, shifting weight, subtle tells, and prepared for the confrontation that had been inevitable from the moment the first knife sliced her uniform. The mastermind laughed softly, a sound that carried both amusement and menace. "You've done well to get this far," he said. "But it's too late. Everything is in motion. You can't stop what's coming." His hand hovered near a concealed weapon, a subtle gesture that didn't escape Alethea's trained vision. She reacted instantly. Time slowed in her mind. One fluid motion, disarm, leverage, and the weapon clattered harmlessly across the floor. Her movements were precise, lethal, and unnerving in their calm efficiency. The mastermind's smirk faltered, replaced by shock. She stepped closer, presence commanding, every instinct honed to a razor's edge. "You've manipulated, betrayed, and ambushed," she said, her voice steady but burning with controlled rage. "But you forgot one thing: I see everything. And I fight back. Always." The tension in the room was tangible, thick enough to cut with a blade. Alethea's torn uniform, her unwavering eyes, and the quiet authority in her movements conveyed one undeniable truth: she was the storm the mastermind hadn't accounted for. And tonight he would learn the hard way that Alethea Draven was the wrong person to mess with. The air inside the industrial building was thick with tension, heavy with the scent of oil, metal, and anticipation. Alethea moved with the quiet precision of a predator, eyes locked on the mastermind. Every shadow, every flicker of light across the monitors, was a signal, a cue to anticipate his next move. The man who had orchestrated ambushes, betrayal, and deception now faced the full force of her wrath, and her mind was sharper than any blade he had ever wielded. The mastermind's voice cut through the silence, calm yet laced with malice. "Lieutenant Draven, you're skilled. But skill alone won't save you. You're alone now. No allies, no backup. Nothing but yourself against the entire network I control." His hand hovered near a concealed weapon, subtle and deliberate. Alethea's eyes narrowed. He thought he controlled the battlefield, but every move he had made, every calculation, had already been anticipated. In a heartbeat he lunged. Alethea reacted instantly, sidestepping with fluid precision, twisting his wrist and sending his concealed knife clattering across the floor. The first strike was met with controlled retaliation. She moved like a storm, fast, relentless, calculated. Each punch, each kick, each disarm was executed with the elegance of a seasoned SEAL and the ferocity of someone who had been pushed to the brink. Monitors flickered around them, casting neon shadows across her torn uniform and sweat-streaked face. Alethea's mind was a blade of focus, analyzing every angle, reading micro-expressions, predicting every overstep. The mastermind's confidence faltered with each second, his plan unraveling before her eyes. He had underestimated her, believed the torn fabric of her uniform marked weakness. He was wrong. It had marked endurance, precision, and unstoppable resolve. Suddenly the building's lights cut out, plunging them into darkness. A faint emergency glow illuminated her eyes, sharp and unyielding. He lunged again, desperate now, reckless. Alethea anticipated every move, her body flowing like water around his attacks, turning his aggression into his own downfall. One precise motion, a twist, a shift in balance, and he was disarmed completely, forced to the ground, his smug expression replaced by raw panic. Alethea knelt, her chest rising and falling steadily, and looked him in the eye. "Wrong person to mess with," she said again, the weight of every betrayal, every ambush, every sleepless night behind the words. She reached forward, securing his hands with a pair of handcuffs she had retrieved earlier. The mastermind's empire, intricate and lethal, was crumbling under her control. The monitors flickered once more, this time showing the coordinated takedown of his network. Allies who had been compromised were being rounded up, evidence seized, operations dismantled. Alethea's plan, precise and patient, had outmaneuvered the orchestrator at every turn. Justice was swift, exact, and thorough. As the first responders arrived, Alethea stepped back, surveying the scene. Her uniform, torn and battle-streaked, was a testament not to defeat, but to triumph. Every bruise, every scrape, every shred of cloth symbolized endurance, skill, and the refusal to be underestimated. The mastermind, now restrained and defeated, was a stark reminder of the consequences of arrogance and betrayal. Alethea exhaled, her body tense but controlled, and allowed herself the briefest flicker of satisfaction. The storm had passed, but the lesson was eternal. Underestimating her was a fatal error. And anyone who had doubted her strength, skill, or resolve now had proof. Tonight, Alethea Draven had faced betrayal, ambush, and deception, and emerged victorious. She had fought with precision, patience, and an unyielding will. And as the dawn's first light began to creep through the industrial windows, she understood one immutable truth. She was the wrong person to mess with, and everyone who had challenged her knew it now. The first rays of dawn broke over Verento Harbor, painting the water in streaks of gold and crimson. Alethea Draven stood at the edge of the docks, her uniform still torn and streaked with sweat, grime, and the marks of battle. The warehouse behind her, once a nest of betrayal, ambushes, and threats, now lay secured, officers moving efficiently to dismantle the network she had exposed. The mastermind, restrained and escorted by authorities, was powerless, a testament to Alethea's skill, patience, and unyielding resolve. Her eyes scanned the horizon, reflecting the calm after the storm. Every ambush, every betrayal, every calculated attack had brought her here. She thought of the men who had underestimated her in the alley, the insiders who had tried to manipulate and deceive, and the orchestrator who had believed himself untouchable. They were all wrong. She had not only survived, but she had dismantled their plans with precision, turning every threat into a lesson in strategy and resilience. Lieutenant Corvin approached, cautious but respectful. "You did it, Alethea," he said quietly, his voice carrying both admiration and relief. "I didn't think. They thought they could control this, but you turned it all around." Alethea's gaze softened briefly, acknowledging both his loyalty and the weight of trust earned. "It wasn't just me," she replied, voice calm but firm. "It was the training, the preparation, the awareness. But yes, timing and resolve made all the difference." As officers secured the remaining conspirators and confiscated evidence, Alethea's mind drifted to the emotional toll, the isolation, the betrayal, and the tension that had been constant since the first cut to her uniform. Each obstacle had tested not only her physical skill but her mental fortitude. She had faced the worst the world could throw at her, and she had emerged unbroken. The alley, the warehouse, and the hidden networks were now behind her, but the lessons endured. Vigilance, patience, and unwavering focus were as vital as any weapon. She walked along the docks, boots splashing lightly in puddles reflecting the rising sun. Workers and officers moved around her, some unaware of the near disaster that had just unfolded. Alethea allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection, the adrenaline ebbing, replaced by the steady pulse of satisfaction. She had proven beyond doubt that strength was more than muscle, more than skill. It was endurance, cunning, and resolve in the face of betrayal. Her communicator buzzed lightly. "All clear, Lieutenant," a familiar voice reported. "The network is neutralized and the mastermind is secured." Alethea nodded, tucking the device away. She knew the harbor would soon return to its normal rhythm, unaware of how close chaos had come. But for her, the victory was personal as much as tactical. She had reclaimed control, restored justice, and reminded everyone, enemies and allies alike, that underestimating her was a fatal error. As the sunlight strengthened, Alethea's eyes lingered on the water, calm and reflective. The torn uniform, the bruises, the sweat, they were marks of survival, proof that she had faced deception, danger, and betrayal without yielding. And in that quiet moment, she understood the truth she had always carried. Resilience was forged in trials, skill was sharpened in adversity, and courage was proven in action. Alethea Draven turned back toward the city, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering. The storm had passed. Justice had been served. And the message was clear: she was the wrong person to mess with, and that truth would echo long after the last conspirator had been brought to justice. The docks were quiet now, the city stirring, unaware of the battle that had raged and ended with a woman's unmatched resolve. Alethea walked into the morning light, a survivor, a warrior, and a force no one would ever underestimate again.